Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. Belarus. This is a little complicated because a lot of things have started happening recently. First and foremost, the opposition leader has disappeared into Lithuania so that she is safe, hopefully, from reprisals. The current sitting president of Belarus, I think his name is Alexander Lukashenko, he's pretty much been in power since Belarus has been independent after the fall of the Soviet Union in whatever it was, 1991 or something. And the the problem is the elections haven't been free and fair in a long time. And this leads me to start questioning why now is this a problem with more Belarusians starting to protest this. So here's where we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson. So, as I said, Alexander Lukashenko has pretty much been the often called the last dictator of Europe. This is no longer the case. I'm looking at you, Viktor Orban in Hungary. But for the longest time, he was seemingly the last real dictator in Europe because Belarus quickly fell into sort of his personal plaything after the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. This is why in Belarus you can still find a lot of Soviet imagery, which is why when people tend to film any kind of Soviet kind of film or where they have to film a scene that's set in Soviet Russia, they often go to, instead of Russia, they often go to places like Lithuania, Ukraine, or Belarus, also Moldova. And the problem with Mr. Lukashenko being a dictator for like 30 odd years now is the corruption has become so endemic that Belarus has not seen any kind of real progress or economic growth or greater prosperity under his leadership. And even though there are restrictions inside Belarus, you can see just by being able to travel around to other nations, other places tend to be doing better. Even their neighbors in Eastern Europe, while not doing as well as Western Europe, are still doing a fair deal better than they were at the end of the Cold War. Belarus, not so much. So slowly over time, people have been trying to fight back. They've been reclaiming the Belarusian language. As I'm sure some of you have seen, they've been flying the old Belarusian flag as opposed to the current state Belarusian flag. But what's not being discussed so far, that is something that I'm very concerned about, is that this could ultimately be a Russian power play. So Russia has historically had too much land and it's too indefensible. This is why Russian expansionism has always been a thing, because they are trying to have these anchor points that they can concentrate what troops they have so as to better defend themselves in geographic areas. This is why they anchored themselves in northeastern Asia, where there's lots of mountains and a big old desert people would have to get through, the mountains of Central and Southern Asia, and of course the mountains of Western Europe. This ultimately results in Russia feeling entitled to Eastern Europe as its sphere of influence, which is why the rapid expansion of NATO into what was seen as the Russian sphere of influence in the 90s and early 2000s has always sat very poorly with them. This is also why Russia fought very hard against Georgia trying to join NATO in 2008, because they didn't want NATO right on its doorstep. They're already very nervous about the Baltic states being in NATO and right on their doorstep. So with what's left that isn't a part of the European Union or isn't a part of NATO is pretty much, if I recall correctly, Finland, Belarus, and the Ukraine. Now we've already seen how Russia has been acting in the Ukraine, and this is kind of just par for the course of Russia always meddling in the Eurasian steppe. What's not talked about is how this also applies to other nations that border Russia, such as Belarus and Kazakhstan. Russia is on a demographic clock. The amount of military and economic might they can muster rapidly diminishes in the next 10 to 20 years, which is why we're seeing Russia making a lot of power plays now. Russia's making power plays in the Middle East, in Central Asia. They're building their own new spaceports so they no longer have to rely on Kazakhstan, and trying to use their economic and military might. They have a very impressive nuclear arsenal to continue to have a fair deal of influence in the world. This is why they're friends with Iran and Syria and constantly work to try and get gas to the various corners of Europe so that they can shut off the pipes whenever Europe does something that they really don't want. This is why a lot of states that depend on Russian energy, like Germany, for instance, tend not to criticize Russia too harshly beyond basic diplomatic finger wagging of, oh, no, 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 that was a bad thing. You should feel ashamed of yourself. And then things go on just kind of as normal. Now, this brings us back to Belarus now that we have some additional historic and demographic context. So I am worried that this turns into a Russian power play. And if Putin is smart, which he seems to be, he could orchestrate this in a way where no matter what, he and the Russian Federation come out as winners. If Lukashenko truly looks to be losing support, then he can support the opposition in Lithuania, which is right next to that lovely little Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. They can finally have a more direct access to the Baltic Sea and break up NATO from being a single potentially unified wall right on their border. He could acquire Belarus as, again, a proper buffer state, yet even more reliant on the Russian economy and oligarchs. If it looks like the opposition isn't going to win, then he can simply assist his old friend, or frenemy perhaps, Alexander Lukashenko, in exchange for, of course, greater concessions and dependence on Russia. And this is not something that I see entering into the conversation. Instead, people are talking about, wow, this could be a real chance for democracy in Belarus. While that is theoretically possible, Russia is right next door, and this nation is often considered to be part of their core area of influence. It's only a matter of time, not a question of if, but it's only a matter of when will Russia decide to intervene, and in what capacity. And the fact that we are not talking about this, and that not many people are recognizing this as a possibility, is what's bothering me.